Several years ago, a survey was taken among the students, and they said, what are things we could do to help make you more successful here? And at the top of that list was this notion of responding to cold calls. Does everybody know what a cold call is? It's where the mean professor like me looks at some student and says, what do you think? And there was a lot of panic and a lot of silence. So as a result of that, this workshop was created, and a vast majority of first-year students here at the GSB go through this workshop. So I'm going to walk you through sort of a hybrid version of what they do. I'm very excited today to talk about effective speaking in spontaneous situations. Let's get started right away. I'd like to ask you all to read this sentence. And as you read this sentence, what's most important to me is that you count the number of F's that you find in this sentence. Please count the number of F's. Keep it quiet to yourself. Give you just another couple seconds here. 3, 2, 1. Raise your hand, please, if you found 3 and only 3 F's. Excellent, great. Did anybody find 4? Okay. Anybody find only 5 F's? And anybody find 6? There's 6 F's. When I first was exposed to this over 12 years ago, I only found 3. And I felt really stupid. I do this because this is a perfect analogy for what we're going to be talking about today. The vast majority of us in this room, very smart people in this room, were not as effective as we could have been in this activity. We didn't get it right. And the same is true when it comes to speaking in public, particularly when spontaneous speaking. It's little things that make a big difference in being effective. So today we're going to talk about little things in terms of your approach, your attitude, your practice that can change how you feel when you speak in public. And we're going to be talking primarily about one type of public speaking. We're talking about spontaneous speaking. When you're in a situation that you're asked to speak off the cuff and in the moment. Maybe it's giving feedback in the moment. Your boss turns to you and says, "Would you tell me what you think?" It could be a surprise toast. Or finally, it could be during the Q&A session. So our agenda is simple. In order to be an effective communicator, regardless of if it's planned or spontaneous, you need to have your anxiety under control. So we'll start there. Second, what we're going to talk about is some ground rules for the interactivity we'll have today. And then finally, we're going to get into the heart of what we will be covering. And again, as I said, lots of activity, and I invite you to participate. So let's get started with anxiety management. 85% of people tell us that they're nervous when speaking in public. So I'd like to introduce you to a few techniques that can work, and all of these techniques are based on academic research. So let me introduce you to a few techniques that I think you can use right away to help you feel more comfortable. The first has to do with when you begin to feel those anxiety symptoms. For most people, this happens in the initial minutes prior to speaking. Maybe your stomach gets a little gurgly, maybe your legs begin to shake, maybe you begin to perspire. And then we start to say to ourselves, "Oh my goodness, I'm nervous. Uh-oh, they're gonna tell I'm nervous. This is not gonna go well." And we start spiraling out of control. So research on mindful attention tells us that when we begin to feel those anxiety symptoms, we simply greet our anxiety and say, "Hey, this is me feeling nervous. I'm about to do something of consequence." And simply by greeting your anxiety and acknowledging it, that it's normal and natural, heck, 85% of people tell us they have it, you actually can stem the tide of that anxiety spiraling out of control. It's not necessarily going to reduce the anxiety, but it will stop it from spinning up. So the next time you begin to feel those anxiety signs, take a deep breath and say, "This is me feeling anxious." In addition to this approach, a technique that works very well, and this is a technique that I helped do some research on way back when I was in graduate school, has to do with reframing how you see the speaking situation. Most of us, when we are up presenting, planned or spontaneous, we feel that we have to do it right, and we feel like we are performing. So when you perform, you know that there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. If you don't hit the right note or your right line at the right time, at the right place, you've made a mistake. It messes up the audience. It messes up the people on stage. But when you present, There is no right way. There's certainly better and worse ways, but there is no one right way. So we need to look at presenting as something other than performance. And what I'd like to suggest is what we need to see this as is a conversation. Right now, I'm having a conversation with 100+ people rather than saying I'm performing for you. But it's not enough just to say this is a conversation. I want to give you some concrete things you can do. First, start with questions. Questions by their very nature are dialogic. They're two-way. What was one of the very first things I did here for you? I had you count the number of F's and raise your hands. I asked you a question. That gets your audience involved. It makes it feel to me as the presenter as if we are in conversation. And I did some research with him that looked at how your orientation to time influences how you react. And what we learned is if you can bring yourself into the present moment, rather than being worried about the future consequences, you can actually be less nervous. Most of us, when we present, are worried about the future consequences. My students are worried they're not going to get the right grade. Some of you are worried you might not get the funding, you might not get the support, you might not get the laughs that you want. All of those are future states. So if we can bring ourselves into the present moment, we're not going to be as concerned about those future states, and therefore we'll be less nervous. There are lots of ways to become present-oriented. I know a professional speaker. He's paid $10,000 an hour to speak. It's a good gig. He gets very nervous. He's up in front of crowds of thousands. Behind the stage, what he does is 100 push-ups right before he comes out. You can't be that physically active and not be in the present moment. Now, I'm not recommending all of us go to that level of exertion because he starts out of breath and sweaty. Okay? But a walk around the building before you speak, that can do it. There are other ways. If you've ever watched athletes perform and get ready to do their event, they listen to music. They focus on a song or a playlist that helps get them in the moment. So let's get started on the core part of what we're doing today, which is how to feel more comfortable speaking in spontaneous situations. Some very simple ground rules for you. So let's get started. The very first thing that gets in people's way when it comes to spontaneous speaking is themselves. We get in our own way. We want to be perfect. We want to give the right answer. We want our toast to be incredibly memorable. These things are burdened by our effort, by our trying. The best thing we can do, the first step in our process, is to get ourselves out of the way. Easier said than done. We work hard, we think fast, we make sure that we get things right. But that can actually serve as a disservice as we try to speak in the moment. So we're going to do our first activity. We are going to do an activity that's called Shout the Wrong Name. So I might point to this and say refrigerator. I might point to this and say cat. You will just shout, and shouting is important, the wrong name. Ready? Begin. Porcupine. California. Salt shaker. This is a wonderful game to train your brain to get out of its own way. You're training yourself to get out of your own way. You're working against the muscle memory that you've developed over the course of your life with a brain that acts very fast to help you solve problems. But in essence, in spontaneous speaking situations, you put too much pressure on yourself trying to figure out how to get it right. So a game like this teaches us to get out of our own way. It teaches us to see the things that we do that prevent us from acting spontaneously. We need to see the speaking opportunity that we are a part of as an opportunity rather than a challenge and a threat. When I coach executives on Q&A skills, when they go in front of the media or whatever, they see it as an adversarial experience, me versus them. And one of the first things I work on is change the way you approach it. A Q&A session, for example, is an opportunity for you. It's an opportunity to clarify. It's an opportunity to understand what people are thinking. So if we look at it as an opportunity, it feels very different. If I see this as an opportunity where I have a chance to explain and expand, I'm going to interact differently with you. So spontaneous speaking situations are ones that afford you opportunities. So when you're at a corporate dinner and your boss turns to you and says, "Oh, you know him better than the rest. Would you mind introducing him?" You say, "Great, thank you for the opportunity," rather than, right? So see things as an opportunity. First, we get out of our own way, and second, we reframe the situation as an opportunity. The next phase is also hard but very rewarding, and that is to slow down and listen. You need to understand the demands of the requirement you find yourself in order to respond appropriately. But often, we jump ahead. We listen just enough to think we got it, and then we go ahead, starting to think about what we're going to respond, and then we respond. We really need to listen. Because fundamentally, as a communicator, your job is to be in service of your audience. And if you don't understand what your audience is asking or needs, you can't fulfill that obligation. So we need to slow down and listen. I have a fun game to play. In this game, you are going to SPLLEVERYTHINGYOUSAY. TOYOURPARTNER. I will translate. You're going to get with the same partner you just worked with, and you are going to have a very brief conversation about something fun that you plan to do today, but you are going to do so by SPELLINGIT. Okay? So you're going to spell it. All right, 30 seconds each. Spell to your partner something fun that you're going to do today. How did this change your interaction with the person you were interacting with? What did you have to do? Focus and listen. And you can't be thinking ahead. You have to be in the moment. When you listen and truly understand what the person is trying to say, then you can respond in a better way, a more targeted response. We often don't listen. So we start by getting out of our own way. We then reframe the situation as an opportunity. Those are things we do inside our head. But in the moment of interacting, we have to listen first before we can respond to the spontaneous request. Listen, and then respond. Now, how do we respond? That brings us to the fourth part of our process. And that is, we have to tell a story. We respond in a way that has a structure. All stories have structure. We have to respond in a structured way. The key to successful spontaneous speaking, and by the way, planned speaking, is having a structure. You start by talking about what the issue is, the problem. You then talk about a way of solving it, and then you talk about the benefits of following through on it. Very persuasive, very effective. Helps you as the speaker remember it, helps your audience know where you're going with it. Another structure, which works equally well, is the what, so what, now what structure. You start by talking about what it is. Then you talk about why it's important, and then what the next steps are. This is a wonderful formula for answering questions, for introducing people. So if I'm in the moment somebody asks me to introduce somebody, I change the what to who. I say who they are, why they're important, and what we're going to do next. Maybe listen to them, maybe drink our wine, whatever. The reality is this: when you are in a spontaneous speaking situation, you have to do two things simultaneously. You have to figure out what to say and how to say it. These structures help you by telling you how to say it. So by using that structure, see how already it helps you? It helps you focus. These structures help because they help you understand how you're going to say what you say. Structure sets you free, and I know that's kind of ironic, but it's true. If you have that structure, then you're free to think about what it is you're going to say. It reduces the cognitive load of figuring out what you're saying and how you're going to say it. Thank you.